welcome to Prendiamola con filosofia. You are a feminist activist and the leader of the international women's movement Femen. You've been always at the forefront in the struggle against patriarchy. What is the role of the body in contemporary politics? And what connections do you see between a male-oriented politics and the exploitation of female bodies in the mass media landscape?
Well, that's a big question, and that's the main question behind our fight that is lasting already for 1 decade. This movement already exists since 10 years and started in Ukraine, and right now is taking place in other countries all over the world. And the question of woman's body and the question of human body as such, being detached from sex, is a big question in politics. And in particular, when we come back to women's question and women's struggle and women's rights and the feminist fight, I think that even if we try very hard, we cannot move away from the question of women's body. All forms of oppression that women have faced throughout the history of mankind were always all about their bodies. If we take woman's body part by part, member by member, our body, we can see how many misconceptions, how many traditional rules, cultural rules, religious rules imposed on each part of woman's body, and how many symbolisms that patriarchal culture put behind woman's body. Woman's body is supposed to serve male causes such as, satisfaction or entertainment. It's always there. Either it's too much or it's not enough. It's too visible or not visible enough. It's always about modesty. It's always about motherhood. It's always about its sexual function. So what happens with each feminine protest and feminine struggle as such, if we don't take action by action, but if we look at feminine struggle for women's rights from a bigger scale as one thing, we will understand that with each action, what women are trying to do is to say that now we want to, as women, we want to take back women's body into the ownership of women. It's no longer has to belong and be owned by society, by institutions, political, religious, cultural. It cannot anymore depend and be defined by society. Us, women, are the rightful owners of those bodies. We define what those bodies signify. We define when those bodies can be sexual and when those bodies can be political and when those bodies can be without any meaning, just my body and nothing else. So that's the big idea behind this struggle. And I think that's why it's, even though, of course, feminism depends a lot, women's struggle depends a lot on cultural, political context in different countries. And of course, women have still very different life experience and different issues that they deal with, depending on the location and other aspects of their life. However, there is one common thing, and this common thing for all women always comes back to their body. It's always about our body on different degree, on different scale. Our bodies are the target. And that's why I think that this tactic worked so well and went beyond Ukraine, went beyond Eastern Europe, something that we actually never thought or tried to do on purpose. It happened naturally.
So what are the female models, if you have anyone, that allowed you to build your ideas and your way of living?
For me personally, well, I wrote a book about all these women who in one way or another, directly or indirectly, influenced me. And many of those women are not feminists. And many of those women would probably even deny the whole idea of women's struggle, feminist struggle. However, with their acts and their life examples of going against the rules, going against the status quo in the society, making their own life story the way that they were not expected by the society as women, inspired me to make my own story, probably in a very unconventional way, especially for Ukrainian women, where we are raised with this expectation to become perfect wives and mothers, and where a woman's success is measured by the success of her husband. I went absolutely the contrary way, the opposite way. And of course, I had to do it in a rather what people perceive as a radical way, as a radical path. However, you know, as I look back at this 10 years, and I think sometimes to myself that what I did was always, well, there is nothing more that I did than taking off my top and using my body as a political poster. And such a simple act resulted in a lot of violence, in torture, in kidnappings. I experienced an extreme forms of violence, physical, moral, psychological violence, for taking off my top and using my body as a poster. You can have different opinion about this act. You might say, I would never do that, and I will perfectly understand you. However, I think that everybody can agree that for taking off top and writing slogan across your chest, people do not have to be kidnapped, tortured, and do not have to face death threats as a daily routine. So, you know, but if I could do that, it's because other women before me did much more brave things and much more radical things. And of course, like if, as I describe in my book, my female hero go from a cartoon personage from a Japanese manga like Sailor Moon, till a woman who was leading a female battalion during the First World War, and was was terrifying the male fighters with a lot of weapons. However, these female battalions were, you know, broke all the stereotypes about women regarding also physical strengths and moral strengths and ability to fight. So there is a diversity in those women who influenced me, and you know, none of them is perfect, but each of them went against the society that expects us to be quiet, modest, and very passive in our lives.
Your book in Italy is published by Giulio Perone Editore. The title is Eroiche amazzoni peccatrici rivoluzionarie, and we're going to present it together in Milan in February, but the pandemic.
Yes, sorry.
But maybe in the future.
I hope so. Yes, I hope very much.
Live about this book. So this is a great question, but it is important in my opinion. What is the deepest meaning of being feminist?
It is indeed a very big question, and I think whatever answer I would give you right now, it would be insufficient. It would be reduced. I think that, you know, I think that being feminist is certainly being able to take risks, because I think that that's something that indeed the patriarchal society expects from each woman, of not taking risks, of giving up the curiosity and the will to explore your life and your possibilities as a human being, not just as a woman, but as a human being as such. So being a feminist is definitely taking risk. And I don't talk all the time about taking risk, you know, of going in the street and facing directly the modern patriarchs like Femin does. But it's also taking risk in your daily life. It's taking risk to go away from a male abuser at home, or to answer back on street harassment. It's taking risk of deciding for yourself on your life choices and your career. It's taking risk for deciding on what you do with your body and with your life as a woman. It's taking risk to decide whether you want to have children or not. It's really all about taking risk to go away from the rules imposed on women's life. It's taking risks to think for yourself, and that's something that this society still does not want us to do. It gives us a perfect kind of a blueprint of our life that we have to follow. Being a feminist, of course, is engaging in struggle. It is not being a passive woman, certainly. It's engaging in a struggle for yourself, first of all. Because, you know, very often people say, well, for example, your fight, feminine fight, does not represent all women. And I think that it's very important to repeat all the time that there is no goal to represent all women, and I don't think that anyone or any struggle, one tactic can represent all women, because by suggesting this we would deny the diversity and multiplicity of women's lives. But if I choose this tactic, it's because this tactic represents me until this point. I might change it, and there will be another tactic that would represent me as a woman. But that's the beauty of feminism, is in multiplicity of tactics, in diversity of voices. And I think that certainly being a feminist is definitely engaging in a struggle. But again, the struggle can take place in the streets. It can take place inside institutions, inside on your workplace. It can take place at home, within your family. I think that it has so many dimensions and so many definitions. That's why it's probably very difficult to make a clear definition, a reduced definition of what it means to be a feminist. To me, to be a feminist is really fully embracing yourself as a human being, even though you found yourself being born in a woman's body, on which so many misconceptions and definitions are imposed. So it's resisting all of this and trying to embrace yourself fully as a human being, following your dreams and being in solidarity with others who struggle just like you.
So another question, the last question, and this is a huge question too. One of your most famous statement is, "I will not stop speaking out loud." How can we build up a louder voice that embraces all the people victims on injustice and discriminations?
You know, behind this statement is something very so profound for me as an activist and as a feminist, and I want to emphasize on this, is a fight for freedom of speech. And I think that very often, also within feminist movement, we forget how precious is this struggle and this fight. Very often we choose self-censorship in order not to offend feelings of others, or we try not to cross, not to go into the dangerous and sensitive topics, because it's always results in a lot of reactions. And, we always want to be careful about some things. But I think we cannot be careful about things that are intolerant to us. There cannot be and should not be tolerance towards intolerant things. And of course, for example, religion is one of those things where feminists are often, try to hesitate to enter into that field. But I think that the fight for freedom of speech is a fundamental to feminist fight, and this should never be forgotten, because I think that the main and most fundamental postulates and fights of feminist struggle is we say in French, libérer la parole des femmes, so to free voices of women. We say we fight for freedom of choice, so freedom of conscience and freedom of speech of women, in order to, to own our right, for example, for contraception and abortion. So it's all going back always to this fundamental right of freedom of speech and freedom of conscience. And this should never be forgotten and never should be compromised. And I think if we as feminists keep always coming back to this struggle of respecting the pluralism of voices, including inside feminist movement, I think that we can faster move towards the final utopia that we are all fighting for, this equality that we imagine, absolute equality between human beings. I think that's why, we should not stop speaking out, and we should never accept that someone else would be stopped in their speech, including those people with whom we personally do not agree. I think it's a fundamental, it's a very simple statement, but it's a fundamental statement behind each social struggle, and especially struggle of women. For too long, we were the ones who were silenced. We were the ones who were censored. We are the ones still right now as society is facing these big challenges, new challenges that nobody really knows how to deal with them. Even during this health crisis that we've seen, a recent health crisis that took place all of a sudden worldwide, we've seen that the experts that were asked to analyze, to talk, were mostly male. Right now, there was a report came out in France that majority of experts that were invited to publicly speak about the health crisis were male. However, in the domain, there are so many women who work, in Italy as well. So if those countries, those progressive and developed countries in Western Europe have such a problem, what can you expect from countries like where I come from Eastern Europe, in Ukraine, where women in every aspect of their life are discriminated and reduced to silence? So it's always coming back to this fight of letting all voices out, including those who you dislike and with whom you disagree. I think that we can never move forward with censoring other opinions, and we can never win against the opinions that we disagree with by censoring them. We have to develop our stronger arguments, we have to develop our stronger thoughts, our stronger tactics, and prove that those ideas have no place to exist, but not censor them.
Thank you so much, Inna Shevchenko. Thank you for being a guest in Prendiamola con filosofia. Thank you for your great power, feminist power, and for your activity. And happy birthday to you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I hope to come to Italy very soon, and I wish strength and power to every Italian. And yeah, the struggle continues. Thank you.